What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? DoctorDDub here, and welcome back to part 2 of my PC building experience. In today's episode, we're actually going to put this thing together. I hope you guys are excited. I know I sure am. And without further ado, let's get building. Now that is a beautiful case. All right, let's take a look at everything that came with this motherboard. This is not going to be an unboxing, but I'm just kind of showing you guys what all I'll be putting in the case later on. So this right here is what's known as an I/O shield, I/O being input and output. It's what goes in the case, and it's where you plug everything in on the back just to make it look nice and pretty. We've got some SATA cables, which are what connect to our hard drives, our hard drive and our solid state. We've got what looks like an RGB extension cable, which is not probably going to be used, at least not right now, since I don't have any LED strips to hook up. And then we also got some lovely zip ties for cable management. And now, for the moment I've been waiting for, it's time to take out the motherboard. And one thing to note that I forgot to do, and I almost didn't do, whenever you're working with electronics, it's a good idea to always ground yourself. So I'm going to touch the metal on the case to get rid of any static electricity that might have built up in my hands. I am working on a wood floor right now, and I'm barefoot, so I don't have socks on. And hopefully that will help to eliminate any static electricity that could build up. Ooh, it's beautiful. The way it'll end up being oriented in the case is like this. And I am so excited to be working on this. This is gonna be amazing. All right, so this is our motherboard. First things first, for the motherboard is we're actually gonna start by installing our CPU. All right, so here is our AMD Ryzen 5 1600. Oh, this thing looks beautiful in person. Let's go ahead and take it out of the box. It's a thing of beauty. One thing to note when installing a CPU is you'll see right there in the corner, there's a gold triangle, which is going to line up with a similar triangle on the motherboard. It's hard to see, but in the bottom left-hand corner there, right there, there's actually a tiny little triangle, and that's how the CPU gets oriented in its sockets. Again, this is an AM4 chip fitting into an AM4 socket. And you'll notice I'm handling the CPU by the sides. You never want to touch the bottom. So all we have to do is line up the two gold corners with each other after lifting up this retention bar, and we should be able to just drop it in. No force required. And you'll know when it's in if you just kind of wiggle it a little bit and it doesn't move anywhere. We drop the retention bar down and lock it underneath that little latch there. And our CPU is now installed. It's as simple as that. Up next, we're actually going to be installing our CPU cooler, which is something I totally forgot to mention last video, but every CPU needs a CPU cooler. And this one, the Ryzen 5 1600, actually comes with one. It's the AMD Wraith Spire is the name of the cooler. And it actually, as far as stock coolers go, ones that come with the CPU, this one actually looks pretty cool. And I know that AMD logo isn't upright, but it's on a fan and it's gonna be moving, so no big deal there. But this is actually a pretty beefy looking CPU cooler. And another thing to note, right here on the bottom, you see there's a copper ring there, and then there's something covering the vast majority of it. That is thermal paste. Usually on higher end coolers or aftermarket coolers, you have to apply your own thermal paste using like a syringe technique, but this one actually comes with pre-applied thermal paste, so we don't have to worry about that. And so for the cooler, you can mount it one of two directions. You see it's rectangular in design. The two screws and two other screws there, they're in a rectangle. So you can mount it rectangularly with this bracket. But on this motherboard, it comes with a different style of bracket. These plastic ones, and they actually have little tabs that some coolers hook onto. This one does not need those, however, so we're going to go ahead and actually remove those. All right, now with those brackets, those pre-installed brackets removed, we can go ahead and install our CPU cooler. So we can either go this way with it, I know my hand's partially in the way there, with the AMD logo facing this way, or we can rotate it 180 degrees and have it facing the other direction. Based on how this all looks, you can actually see it's personal preference. It is 100% personal preference. You can see it actually has a Strix logo right there. I know it's kind of hard to see, but that's facing this direction, and the OCD in me really wants to orient it the same direction, so all the text is facing the same way. So that's what I'm going to do. CPU cooler physically installed. I still have to plug it in. You'll notice when I was tightening those down, I went all the way around once just to thread them into the socket, or into the where the screws tighten in, and then from there I tightened them in a diagonal fashion. So I did this one, then I went diagonal, then across, and then diagonal again, just to make sure it's tight evenly all the way around. And now I'm going to consult the manual for where this CPU fan header plugs in. Usually there's a header labeled CPU fan somewhere, which this will plug into. I'm gonna go find that. After consulting the motherboard's user manual, we have one option. There are two plugs right here, one of which says AIO pump, the other says chassis fan 1, or CHA fan 1, which stands for chassis. On these pins, there is only one orientation to orient it. On these pins, you'll see there's 4 holes. They're closer to one side than the other. And then on the plastic portion where the metal pins are coming off the motherboard, the pins are towards one side and not the other. So we plug this in, orienting it in the correct orientation to the AIO pump, which stands for all-in-one. You can do, this is a fan cooler or an air cooler. They also make liquid coolers, all-in-one liquid coolers, which actually run liquid over top your CPU. And that's what gives them, or that's what cools it rather than air. We're going with the stock air cooler for this though, since we're not planning on doing much overclocking, and that should serve us just fine. Up next, we're going to be installing the RAM. There's no exact science to the order you have to do this in, but there is a recommended order, and I'm gonna do the RAM next. You can see I've only got 2 sticks of RAM, yet there are 4 slots or DIMMs to put the RAM in. After consulting the motherboard manual, I'm supposed to be using the 2nd and 4th slots. And you can see on the RAM itself, there's a little notch in the middle, which is slightly to the left of center. It's the same on both, except this one's upside down. On the DIMMs as well, you can also see that there's a slight notch in the middle, or slightly left of middle. That means these need to be oriented to line up with that notch. But before I go pressing them in, there are tabs On this motherboard, it's just on the one side. So on this side, I need to pull those tabs down. This side is stationary, it doesn't move. And to put the RAM in, you simply slot it in, starting with that side, and go straight down with it. If I can line this up right. Straight down, and you push until you hear a little click. And that RAM is now slotted in. Do the same with the other. And there we go. Our memory is now seated. All right, now that we've got most everything installed on the motherboard, it's time to actually put the motherboard in the case. And the case actually came with a box of assorted parts. These 5 bags were among those. And 4 of these contain different types of screws. And this is something that I've watched hundreds of hours of YouTube videos regarding building a PC, and this is never mentioned once in any of the videos I've watched at least. Make sure to consult your manual. So many of these look so similar, and they're really not that much different from each other. So make sure you're using the correct screws for your motherboard. In our case, this bag right here, these are our screws for the motherboard, and these are the standoffs for the motherboard. And now that we know what screws are for what, let's go ahead and get this motherboard into this PC. Before we install the motherboard, there's actually one more thing we have to do. I almost forgot about the I/O shield, which if you don't know how to orient it, this one actually has text on it. And so that text just needs to be legible when this case is vertical. So this being the bottom, and we're looking into this case from the side. So this is the bottom of the case, this is the top of the case. So the bottom of the I/O shield, where you can read the text from, needs to face the bottom of the case. And the pretty side here faces out. The ugly metal side faces in. And this actually goes in from the inside of the case, and you just push it until it snaps in place. And it's as simple as that. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we have our motherboard installed. I'm gonna leave, there's a little protective film on this. I don't know if you guys have seen that yet. I'm gonna leave that on until I'm pretty much done with the build. That's gonna be one of the last things I peel off, just in case I, you know, God forbid I scratch it or something. I'd rather scratch the covering than the actual plastic cover on that. And behind this is actually the chipset. I mentioned in the last video that this had an AM4 socket and a B350 chipset. That's actually where the chipset is housed, if anyone was curious. But now it's time to stand the case up, and we get to work on it vertically. And my goodness, this thing is beautiful. All right, now that we've got the motherboard installed, we've flipped around to the back side of the case here, or the right side, depending on how you look at it. And we're gonna go ahead and install our power supply. All right, and here we can see everything that comes with the power supply. We've got the unit itself. Again, with the semi-modular design, these cables do not come unattached. They are permanently a part of the power supply. The rest, however, are modular, which makes this a semi-modular unit. We've got 3 sets of SATA cables for our hard drives. We've got our 6 plus 2, making 8-pin connector for our graphics card. And then we also have our 24-pin, and if I can untangle it, our 8-pin. Both of which go to the motherboard. The 24-pin here is for the motherboard itself, and the 8-pin provides power to the CPU. All right, spinning the PC or the case back around, you can see there's this bracket here on the back. It's actually held in just by thumb screws. And I believe on this case, they're what are known as captive thumb screws. They don't come out. This bracket actually will attach to the back of the power supply. It will screw on, and there's places for 4 screws. The top there, the bottom 2 corners, and then the top right side here. And the case and the power supply both came with power supply screws. There is nothing different about them. These are the ones that came with the power supply, and these are the ones that came with the case. The screws, it's hard to see through the bag, but they're identical. It doesn't matter which set you use. So just pick a set and go with that. I'm gonna go ahead and attach this bracket and then slot it into the back here, and we'll have our power supply installed. All right, and that is a power supply installed. You'll notice I made special note to face the fan down. The reason for that is this case has feet which elevate it off the table or wherever you set it. And so it can suck in fresh air from the bottom, which is very important, especially on a case like this with a power supply shroud. Because you can see at the top, there is ventilation for it. It's kind of hard to see, but if we zoom in there, you can see there is some ventilation for it at the top, but most of the air that's going to be coming off of our graphics card, which will be right above it, is going to be hot air. And so I want it sucking in cool air from down below at the bottom there, rather than hot air from inside the case. I want cool air moving from the outside of the case into the case to cool off the components and then exhausting the hot air out. I also made sure to pre-plug in all the cables that I was going to need, or at least the ones I think I'm going to need. I've never done this before, so I'm not quite sure. We've got all these braided cables here, the ones that are non-modular, obviously we're going to be using. And the other ones I plugged in are these here. One is for our graphics card. It's the 6+2 pin connector. It actually connects, not quite sure how, but it can slot in like that to make an 8-pin connector. And it also has a second one. So you could actually plug in 2 graphics cards off this same cable. So I'm not gonna be using these, and there's no way to get rid of them because they're kind of wired into this. So I'll just have those kind of hanging out, and I'll end up using the other 6. The other cable I plugged in was our SATA cable, which is actually really cool because it plugs in just at one location on the power supply. And then along the cable, there are, see if I can get these in frame, 4 connectors. 1, 2, 3, 4 that plug in to your cards. And this is actually a 90-degree connection. There are some that are straight up and down, or straight non-90 degrees, and I might end up running 2 of these, one with the 90-degree connectors and one with these straight connectors, if I can, because the way our SSD is gonna plug in, it actually connects on this panel back here. That's where our SSD is going, and our hard drive is going down here in these hard drive cages. So yeah, that's a power supply install. Next thing we're gonna do, I think we're gonna wire up our hard drives. All right, to install our SSDs, this case actually comes with an SSD tray that's actually removable just by loosening this one captive thumb screw. And then the entire tray comes out. Very easy, allowing you to take it out of the case and mount your SSD here instead of like on the case, which can be kind of awkward. This just makes things a lot easier. With the SSD tray off, it's as simple as deciding where we want to place it. I'm thinking I want to do it on the left-hand side, leaving the logo still exposed. And if we want to add any more, we can just add more later down the road. So all we have to do is flip it over and line the holes, the 4 holes there on the bottom of the SSD, up with those 4 holes on the SSD tray. Screw them in. All right, with the SSD installed, all we have to do is slot it back in to the slots it goes into, and we're done. You'll notice we haven't done any wiring yet. Everything is still just kind of all hanging out down here at the bottom. I'm saving that for last. Routing cables in this case is fairly easy from what I've read. I just need to know what all I need to plug in first, and so I'm plugging in everything that needs connections first, and then I'm gonna route cables afterwards. But now we're gonna go ahead and mount our other drive, this one being an actual hard drive, this 2 terabyte Seagate Barracuda. And you can see the connection for it, or the connections for it, are on this end. So we need to make sure that this end here is facing out. And to do that, all we have to do, I'm pretty sure these are toolless. All you do is pull in on the tabs and slide them out. And that's as simple as that. We now have our hard drive tray. All we have to do is pretty much the same thing we did for our SSD tray. Take it out, put it upside down, screw it into place, and slot it back in. What's nice about these hard drive cages is they actually come with these little rubber washers, I guess you could call them. And since hard drives have moving parts in them, unlike SSDs, they actually can vibrate, and they're actually a pretty common source of noise in computers. And so with these rubber washers between the screws and the metal drive cage, it actually prevents it from rattling, which is wonderful. So this helps this case be quite a bit more silent. All right, ladies and gentlemen, last but certainly not least, it is time to install our graphics card. And this is what I meant by this thing caught my eye and I just had to have it. It's beautiful. And it has a backplate as well, which isn't necessary at all. It serves next to no function except for looking awesome. But without this backplate right here, you would see nothing but, sorry, I've got a light I'm trying to catch here. You'd see nothing but this kind of, it's called the PCB. It's the, you see a ton of it on the motherboard, all the components and circuitry and wiring and all that. And also, it's not bad to touch the backplate. It is bad to touch the circuitry. So it allows you to kind of handle it from the rear without messing anything up. But to install this thing, you can see on the side here, it has two, well, this is the back of it actually, and that's upside down. But here is the rear of the graphics card, and that's actually where you plug in stuff. So your monitors and whatever else, if you have a VR headset or something, it would all plug in to here. And so you can see there's two little slots here, which correspond to two slots on this side of the case. You can see there's actually 7 there. These white, they're called PCIe covers. There's 7 of them. And the way this graphics card will line up is it's got the portion of it, it actually sits in the case like so, upside down, more or less. The fancy side faces the bottom, which is kind of counterintuitive in my opinion, but that's how it's designed. So there's a slot right here, which is actually covered in plastic right now. I'm gonna leave it on until I'm ready to put it in because I don't want to damage anything prematurely or period. So if I line that up with this top PCIe slot, it lines up to where these metal brackets right here line up with the second 2. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove those 2, which will enable us to install our graphics card. All right, and with the PCIe slot covers removed, we're ready to install our graphics card. But first, we gotta remove all of the stuff that's all over this. It's got some DVI-D port covers, which is that kind of port right there, if you've never seen one of those before. I know I hadn't until I started researching all this. We'll save the backplate covering for last, but there seems to be a plastic cover over all of this. Oh, that is so satisfying. All right, time to install our Asus ROG Strix NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1050 Ti. One thing that's nice about this motherboard is it actually has steel reinforced PCIe slots. So the little slot that I just plugged the graphics card into, it's the whole weight of this thing, and this isn't even that big of a graphics card, but the whole weight of this thing is supported by that PCIe slot, which is where it sends all of its data through, and these two screws and the metal plate on the back. So all of this portion is just kind of suspended there. So it's really nice to have those steel reinforced PCIe slots to help hold the weight. But now that we've got every single component installed, it's time for, I guess, a time lapse of me attempting to cable manage everything. This is gonna take me a little bit of time since I've never done this before, so I hope you enjoy my struggle. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is my best attempt at cable management. There were a couple cables I plugged in during that I had kind of forgotten about. SATA power and data cables for our hard drives. This one right here, this 4-wire or 5-wire cable is power, and then this 2-wire cable is data. So the data cables are running from both of our hard drives around the front to our motherboard, and the SATA power cables are running, actually it's from this SSD to this hard drive, and from there to the power supply. So they're both getting fed power from our power supply. We actually have room to attach 2 more if we wanted to. The way I wired this up though, that probably wouldn't work just based on the fact that I used 1 cable to route power to our hard drives and our SSDs. Usually it's probably better to use 1 cable for both hard drives if you do choose to populate both slots. I only populated 1, and then use another one for your up to 3 SSDs if you have that many. But with that, it's time to put the panel back on and then take one last look at the front. All right, to put the side panel back on, it's as easy as slotting it in and then tightening the 2 thumb screws on the back. But one last thing I wanted to note is that this panel is actually sound dampened. This is actually sound dampening material. So this case is designed somewhat for silence in mind, which is kind of nice because you don't want a super noisy PC. All right, that is what our finished product looks like from the front minus 1 cable. Just to recap on a couple things I did, I ran the fan connector down here, all the front panel I/O, so all the USB ports, your front panel audio, the power, the actual physical power button, the LED for the power button, all of that stuff got plugged in right down here. That was a little difficult. Those were really tiny and not very well labeled. I ended up finding the actual correct place to plug in the CPU fan. There is a CPU fan header up here with an optional one right below it. I didn't even see those earlier. And then I ended up running this rear case fan, which is set up in an exhaust configuration. So we'll be intaking cool air in from the front through these side vents, intaking cool air, blowing it across our components, and then the hot air will get exhausted up top. These are the fans that came with the case. I didn't choose to upgrade them. I forgot to plug in 1 cable, which I will do here in a sec. It's this down here. It's an HD audio cable for all of the audio jacks up front, the headphone out, as well as the microphone in. And I'm pretty sure that's it. I think cable management was pretty good for my first PC. I am very pleased with how this came out. I wish I could get rid of this second PCIe connector that I don't need. It's set up to run to 2 graphics cards, and I only have 1. So if I ever do get a second one, that'll be great. Well, actually I'd probably upgrade my power supply, but since I don't have a second one for the time being, it's just gonna hang out down here. I'm gonna go ahead and plug in this HD audio connector, and we'll take one final look at the case before seeing if it actually boots. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for the most fun part about a tempered glass case, and that is revealing the beauty beneath. Oh my goodness. That looks amazing. I gotta put the thumb screws in on the panel so it doesn't fall out. And then I'm gonna hook up a monitor and keyboard to this thing and see if we can get it to boot. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my kitchen. I did not have enough room on that table I was working on to fit all of this, but it is time to test this and see if I built a working computer or if it needs work still. I went ahead and took off the tempered glass side panel so we can see a little bit better what's going on. I was getting some pretty nasty reflections from some of these lights. But without further ado, I've got this plugged in, but I have the power supply off currently. So I'm gonna flip the power supply on and see if anything happens. Hopefully stuff should start doing something. Ooh! Okay, cool. We got lights. That's a good thing. The computer's not actually on yet, so that's all I was hoping for. Or I actually didn't even know I'd be getting lights, but all right, for the moment of truth, it's time to power this thing on and see if it works. If it does work properly, it'll take a little bit, but we should see something pop up on the screen, probably saying something about Republic of Gamers or something Asus related, which is the motherboard I'm using, because the screen that'll pop up is tied to what your motherboard is. It should be the UEFI or BIOS, whatever it's called. It's basically the the software portion of your of your motherboard. So, moment of truth. Ooh, okay. Things are spinning. Fans are on. A couple more LEDs just popped on. That's good. And now, ooh, something's happening. Ooh! Ooh! Yes. All right, we should boot into the BIOS real quick. Give it a few seconds. We're in. Oh, awesome. This looks, oh, guys, we built a computer. We successfully built a computer. Oh, this is exciting. All right, guys, that's gonna do it for this video. I'm gonna go straight in and start messing with stuff. I need to install Windows first off and then get some things set up, install new drivers, all that fun stuff. Not gonna show that on camera because there's not a single exciting portion of that. But once I get done with all that, part 3 of this series is going to be, I'm planning on running some benchmarks of this computer versus my laptop that I was currently doing stuff on. I want to run a couple just standard benchmark stuff, and I also want to just test how long it takes to render a video, and maybe I'll do some screen captures and show you guys of kind of what it looked like on my laptop versus what it looks like now on this beauty. All right, guys, thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed. If you have any questions about anything I covered or failed to cover, please go ahead and ask them down in the comments below. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, as always, take care.